My name is John Herbst. I am the director of the Dino Patrizio Eurasia Center here at the Atlantic Council. Today we have the pleasure of hosting a distinguished panel of Russian writers who will give us an insight into the state of freedom in Mr. Putin's Russia. For those of you who are watching at home, you can follow the discussion by using the hashtags @ACRussia or @RussiaRights and following @ACEurasia on Twitter. I'd now like to invite Masha Gessen, distinguished and courageous Russian journalist, up to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. My name is Masha Gessen. I'm a writer and journalist. I'm also a trustee of PEN America. And let me say a few words about PEN America before I introduce the panel. PEN, as some of you probably know, is a writer-powered organization with a membership of more than 4,300 authors. And it does something fascinating. It both celebrates literature and fights to protect the environments and the rights of writers that allow them to create the literature that it celebrates. So that's exactly the balance we're trying to strike with this delegation as well. This is a group of extraordinary writers who are trying to tell a very, very complicated story, right? And in the events that they've done in the last 3 days in New York, it's become clear just how complicated the story is. This is not a story, sort of straightforward censorship. It's a subtle and, in some ways, more tragic story of a shrinking space. And PEN has created this handy report that gives you some details on the story, but you will also hear from them today. So we have here Anna Nemzer, who is a novelist and an editor, who's also has for years been involved in some extraordinary projects in sort of struggling to reclaim a historical narrative in Russia that is independent from the Kremlin. She has been instrumental in creating a virtual museum of the 1990s, which is now it's sort of a multimedia oral history project, which is also now going to become a book. Her wonderful novel, Imprisoned, yeah? Prisoner, sorry. Her wonderful novel, Prisoner, is also a historical novel that addresses both World War II and the Soviet war in Afghanistan. Next to her is Maria Stepanova, who is a poet, and I would say the poetic voice of her generation. She's also the editor of a culture website called kolta.ru, which started as openspace.ru. And then through sort of typically Russian story was forced to change ownership and has become a fully crowd-funded website. Which makes it a rare example of something that really does have the ability to function independently in Russia. Kolta was started as a cultural website, and it very quickly, as I think Maria can explain, became clear that there is no culture in Russia independently of politics. Next to her is Lyudmila Ulitskaya, who needs no introduction, but I will just mention that she is a novelist, a best-selling Russian author. Her latest translation into English, The Big Green Tent, is just out from FSG. And at the end here is Ilya Danishevsky, who is both a novelist and a publisher. He has his own imprint with one of the two large Russian publishing conglomerates, and I would say he probably takes more risks and does more interesting stuff with this one imprint than all of his colleagues put together in the book publishing business. And moderating all of this will be Scott Stossel, who is the editor of The Atlantic magazine and the former executive editor of the American Prospect magazine, and the author of the New York Times bestseller My Age of Anxiety, Fear, Hope, Dread, and the Search for Peace of Mind, which has been roundly praised by every publication. I have a long list here, but it really is a terrific book, and it's a great honor to have Scott take this panel over for me.
Well, can you all hear me? Let me start by saying thank you to the Atlantic Council for hosting this and to PEN America for putting this event together, and to Masha, who was too modest to say that she herself is a writer who lived in Russia for many years as a critic of the Putin regime and endured, if I'm remembering rightly, surveillance threats, particularly as a journalist and as a homosexual in Russia. This is you're one of the bravest people I know, which is a helpful segue to my introduction here, which is, I work at the Atlantic. I work with many, many brave American writers, and they are sometimes brave in their physical courage, especially when they're covering war situations. Their life is sometimes in danger. Much more often than that, they run the risk of censure. They could get if you take a policy stance that is against the prevailing conventional wisdom, you run the risk of being shamed and embarrassed on social media and on other venues. What everyone on this panel here, besides me, has is you are truly brave in that the work that you do day to day, whether it's publishing, writing poetry, writing fiction, doing journalism, is incredibly important to the cause of the advancement of human rights and of the betterment of humanity, but is also a literal endangerment to your physical safety and to your ability to communicate. So I just want to say thank you all for being here. I guess I thought, as I was thinking about this panel, I thought back to about 20 years ago. I went to a conference for the centennial celebration of the literary critic, the American literary critic Edmund Wilson. A great sort of discoverer of and promoter of F. Scott Fitzgerald, friend and sometimes enemy of Nabokov, and at this conference, which again was 20 years ago, there was a presentation by David Remnick, who is now, of course, the editor of The New Yorker, but at the time was recently returned as Washington Post editor, or Washington Post bureau chief from Moscow. And this was in 1995. So the Soviet Union had fell, Gorbachev had given way to Yeltsin, and at the end of the session, and I actually went back and looked this up, and I was reassured about my failing short-term memory that I actually remember this, about 30% correctly. I actually remember this exchange, so I went back and found it. So during the Q&A, someone asked Remnick, who wrote the great book Lenin's Tomb, about the last stages of the Gorbachev era and of the Soviet Union. Someone said, it used to be that literature had this incredible power in the Soviet Union precisely because it had to be samizdat, or it was foreboding, and the questioner said, look, all of a sudden, and I think he was quoting actual facts, suddenly Jackie Collins, as opposed to Dostoevsky or Chekhov or Nabokov or Solzhenitsyn, is now leading the bestsellers. Isn't this a great loss in terms of the power of literature? And Remnick said, and I'll quote here, I don't think it's sad at all. I think it's normal. The great writers of the Soviet Union were imprisoned and killed too, because they were alternative journalists. There was no honest journalism there of any kind, and yet certain writers were telling the news if they could manage to get it out. And so the reasons for their exalted positions were entirely perverse. There's a tradition of comments about this extraordinary position. Solzhenitsyn calls it a second government. But I think, thank God, that's all done now. That was in 1995. It's not all done now. So let me open it up to you, and let me start by asking Ilya, who's been writing for many years. What is the current status of the writer and the public intellectual who is a critic of the Putin regime in Russia today?
Что происходит в современной России, то, что всех нас и в том числе и в первую очередь писателей и художников быть политичными.
What I believe is most important right now in the current day Russia for us artists and writers is to be involved in politics.
Всем вам известно, что в России давняя культура ненависти к собственным писателям.
Everybody knows that there is a long tradition going back in history in Russia to hate their own writers.
Сегодня она продолжается, но в новой форме.
Today this tradition lives on, but it took a new shape.
Вместо убийства нам предлагается зона полного молчания.
Instead of killing us, they offer us to move to a zone of complete silence.
Нам может показаться, что это намного лучше, намного более гуманно, но находясь на месте писателей, мы не можем быть так уверены.
Somebody might think that it is more convenient and it is more humane approach, but we, being what we are, we cannot accept it. We cannot take it.
Мы существуем в пространстве полной дегуманизации.
We live in a space of complete dehumanization.
Место писателя снижено настолько, насколько можно себе представить.
And the role of a writer is degraded as far low as one can imagine.
Поэтому мы не говорим, что у государства есть какая-либо потребность в цензуре выпускаемых книг.
That's why we do not say that the government needs a censorship to prevent us from publishing our books.
То, что практически не существует, не надо урезать.
One do not need to censor what doesn't exist.
Ludmila, what do you think about that? And then Anna and Maria.
Вы знаете, дело в том, что мы сейчас прожили очень интересный для России уникальный кусок времени. 25 лет в России не было цензуры.
Lately, we lived through a very unusual and very interesting stage of Russia's history. For 25 years, Russia had no censorship.
В России цензура началась не со времен советской власти, а гораздо раньше, со времен существования литературы, я бы сказал.
The censorship was introduced in Russia not with communism, but much longer before. It started when the literature started.
Этот кусок, видимо, сейчас заканчивается.
And most likely this stage is going to be over soon.
Как это ни странно, я бы сказала, что это не принципиально. Вот есть цензура или нет цензуры, для литературы на самом деле не принципиально.
But to my surprise, I should say that it's not essential actually whether censorship exists or not for me as a writer.
Даже до некоторой степени цензурное давление немножко даже вызывает к ней дополнительный интерес.
Actually, the censorship, the pressure of the censorship, provokes a certain additional interest to the literature.
У нас очень жестокая цензура в средствах массовой информации. Очень жестокая.
We have a very harsh censorship in media.
Все время закрываются независимые издания, независимые телеканалы. Осталась очень маленькая зона, крохотная, независимых.
The government keeps shutting down independent media, independent TV channels, and the area where independent media is still allowed, is shrinking.
Литература пока государство совершенно не интересует. Мы власти не интересны, как незначительные тараканы, совсем маленькие.
And so far the government doesn't care about the literature. They don't care us like they wouldn't care about little insects.
Ну, лично меня это, честно говоря, устраивает.
And I'm fine with it.
Вот. Но как будет развиваться эта ситуация, мы не знаем.
But we can't say what's gonna happen next.
Единственное, что я определенно могу сказать про наше проживание вот последних лет, что жизнь наша очень сложна, во многом неприятна и чрезвычайно интересна.
But one thing I can say for sure for the several last years of our life became more complicated, more challenging, quite unpleasant, and extremely interesting.
И я, на самом деле, очень рад тому, что я могу сказать эти слова «интересно», потому что следующий этап будет такой, что я уже не смогу сказать «интересно».
And I'm glad that I can say this word interesting, because I presume that with the next stage I will not be able to say that.
Пока интересно.
So far, it's going to be very interesting.
So very briefly, just to the two of you, Maria and Anna, do you agree with that? Life has become more difficult and more interesting?
Well, it is more interesting, more difficult, and I would say maybe controversially more violent. No one of us experienced real violence that would be sorry, I'm trying to speak English, and as you can see, my English is very faulty. But I'll give it a second try, and you'll forgive me if I fail. What I wanted to say lies, well, in the realms of an experience that I achieved when I was, while working at my, so to say, second profession. I am a poet and I'm a journalist. I'm editing a website. And we write a lot about different things that are concerning the overall climate, social climate in Russia, something that is getting more and more heated and more, shining with violence. And we're writing about home violence also. And there is a term that I know because of writing about home violence in Russia, and no one in Russia, almost no one, maybe with the exception of 3 or 5%, and hopefully 3 or 5% knows, shelters. I have this feeling that writing in Russia in current time, whatever you're writing about, in any style, in any line of doing that, is a kind of building a shelter. Because in violent times, people of any political belief have to look for a place where they're able to find a safe space for looking around, safe space for debate, safe space for rest, and a safe space for thinking things anew. And, well, it is, yes, it's becoming more and more hard to do so. But this opportunity still exists.
Well, I agree with all my colleagues. It's really getting more and more interesting. And, well, we all are kind of guinea pigs, but with a great limit of reflection. And we can observe it and describe it. And actually, it's a great opportunity. We have a huge amount of examples of how censorship works. We have examples of how self-censorship works, and we have some examples of how our muteness works. And for instance, yesterday we had a big public talk, and I, amongst other things, I said that Alexei Navalny, the only one Russian oppositioner, is not actually my candidate. After that, I was so close to commit suicide because I realized that I, in America, say that Alexei Navalny is not my candidate. And now I'm a little bit correcting my mistakes. Because he's a great politician with a great charisma, he's smart, and so on. But the thing is that maybe I have some points of disagreement with him. In any other situation, I would be glad to argue with him, not as his political opponent, but as just a part of his electorate. But in our situation, I just think, is it a really appropriate moment for my little claims and my little disagreement? It's so inappropriate, and this is how our mind closes, actually.
Mm-hmm. I want to soon get into more about what you just said and about the intersection between art and fiction and politics. But I wanted to ask you all of you a very practical question first, which is, given the current environment in Russia with a kind of newly sort of martially minded regime and Putin cracking down on things. Does this trip that you've all taken, when you go back to Moscow or wherever you live in Russia, will you be more under surveillance or in more physical or psychological danger than you were before you left? And anyone who wants to take that should take it.
Да, я отвечу. Если мы предполагаем, что после нашего приезда за нами будет более пристальное наблюдение или к нам будет применено физическое насилие, то там мы говорим о очень примитивных действиях современного режима.
If we presume that upon our return we are going to be more surveilled or the physical pressure is going to be exercised upon us, then it would be a mistake. It would be too primitive to think that regime is too primitive in his dealing with us.
На мой же взгляд, мы существуем в некой системе, которая не имеет столь ясных причин и следствий.
We live in a system where the clear delineation of cause and effect is missing. Thank you.
Единственное судебное дело, которое было направлено против Кольта, было за одно матерное слово, но не за их статьи про войну.
The only court case which was opened against Kolta was for using the one swear word and not for the articles against the war.
Большая часть судебных дел, которые мы получаем в связи с книгами, тоже связаны с каким-либо абсурдом.
And most cases which we get in court in regards to the books we publish are also related to some incredibly stupid reasons.
Между тем, книги, касающиеся войны на Украине, проходят с абсолютным молчанием.
And the books about the war in Ukraine are completely silenced.
То есть после этого следует, что никакого логического преступления и наказания все же не существует.
So there is no logical cause and effect in crime and punishment in Russia.
В современности, когда любая репрессия становится достоянием общественности в течение 10 минут, мы должны говорить, что все механизмы претерпели изменения.
The problem is that in current times, when any pressure, any repression, people become aware of it in 10 minutes. The system mutated a lot.
Их цель больше не замалчивание или уничтожение конкретной информации, а скорее запугивание.
The government, the system's goal is not to silence certain information, but to threaten, to intimidate.
Даже сам этот вопрос, может ли с нами что-то случиться, это какое-то следствие вот этой запуганности.
And the very question which you asked about whether something might happen to us is the effect of this system of intimidation, of the spirit intimidation, environment of intimidation.
Самое непонятное лично для меня в личности Путина то, что он никогда не пытался, чтобы его любили. Он больше всего, чего он хотел, чтобы его боялись.
The biggest problem with Putin is that he was never looking for love. All what he wanted is to be that people would be afraid of him.
И когда мы слышим эти вопросы здесь, в Америке, видимо, этот образ действительно был грамотно сформулирован.
And when we hear these questions here in the United States, we understand that he achieved his goal. He managed to impose his language.
Well, let me deepen and complicate the question, and any of you three should feel free to answer, but you go first. On top of what will the reception of you, and what are your fears about going back to Russia after this tour? When Cuban baseball teams would tour the United States, often many of them of the players would defect. Do you feel temptation to do that? Because here we have complete, free expression. First Amendment, stipulating Trump doesn't become president, still obtains. And beyond that, what is your feeling about Russia? And this goes for all of you. Do you love it or do you hate it? And I realize that's a complicated question. You may love the culture and history of Russia, but hate the current regime. But give me some thoughts on that.
Well, I could do it as people do it on Facebook when they're writing, it's complicated. But Well, in fact, being frank, I have to admit that, yes, I love it. And I think that I am, in a kind of a constant relationship with this country. I want to go back. And I feel that it is fair. I mean, someone has to love it. Not only, the guys who are roaring, who are running around saying, we love Russia, our mother Russia, and whatever. Someone have to love it from the other side, yes? And I do. And speaking about what Ilya was saying, I want to make just one small point. Yeah, I totally agree. But yes, the regime, it acts bizarre. But it is funny sometimes. But it doesn't mean it is any less effective because of that. And yesterday in New York, we were remembering the case story of Oleg Kashin, an acclaimed journalist from Russia. And it is a striking example of how things are working in Russia in current times. Kashin was writing about everything worth mentioning, about war in Ukraine, about every important news of nowadays. But he was beaten to death, not because of that, but because of writing a few lines on Facebook or in Live Journal, it was a few years ago, about some political weirdo that no one was even aware of in that time. So Russian social and political climate is a comedy, but with quite an unexpected ending. You never know what is going to happen next, and that is what is making it so, scary.
What is the ending for you or for anyone? What do you think the ending is, Ludmila?
Я должна сказать, что вы узнаете. Благодаря интернету вы очень быстро узнаете. Если нас возьмут за ухо, то вы будете это знать на ближайшие 15 минут.
I should say that you'll know what's going to happen because you'll know very quickly. Once they pull me by the ear, you'll know it in 15 minutes.
We'll write about it in tweets.
Do any of you feel physically endangered by the work that you do in Russia? Or in danger of imprisonment?
Physically endangered, I guess no. There was a point when I was feeling that what I am doing is kind of risky. It was when we were deciding if to publish or not an article also by Oleg Kashin about the burials of the Russian soldiers near Pskov. And we were not the first magazine he addressed with this piece, with this article, and everyone was refusing him. And we also could feel, the fear tickling. But as you can see, we decided to publish, and luckily nothing happened. But, of course, you never know. But no, I don't feel very much endangered personally, at least now.
Well, here's a question for any of you about, in the context of American politics, some, particularly on the left, would say that the post-Enlightenment project of the last 300-400 years is under threat, and that the value of empiricism and truth is actually under threat. Well, let me put it bluntly, what is the value of truth in Russia, and how do you resist the state's impulse to distort it? Which, again, from reading all of your work, I get the sense that that is the sort of default mechanism is for the state to distort truth. So I guess Ilya just.
Я расскажу о самых примитивных механизмах искажения.
Let me give you the most simple examples of the mechanism
Я думаю,
of the
после Анна
distortion.
расскажет нам более подробно.
And maybe Anna is going to provide other more detailed examples.
В России существует достаточно обширная конъюнктура и номенклатура помощи писателям и социальных лифтов. Социальных лифтов.
There is a quite wide gamut of quite broad system of assistance to writers and social lifts.
Так на вершине этих лифтов сидят люди, которые имеют те или иные отношения с государством. Мы перестаем говорить о какой-либо независимости. Говорить о независимости этих институтов.
And since people who sit on top of the social lifts maintain certain kind of relationship with the government, we stop talking about their independence.
Так формируется официальная литературная культура России.
And this is how the official culture of literature in Russia is shaped.
И по тем или иным причинам этот официальный дискурс сконцентрирован вокруг игры в русскую историю. Это роман, главный жанр в современной русской литературе – это псевдоисторический роман.
And for certain reasons, the main narrative and the name of the game is the game in the Russian history. In other words, pseudo-historical novels are becoming the kind of literature which the government prefers.
Участие в этой официальной культуре – это не требует никакого профессионализма, требует лишь разделения некоторого количества верных взглядов.
And in order to be engaged into this official culture, one does not need to be a professional. All what you need to do is just to share certain values.
И должного количества правильных знакомств.
And have certain kind of right connections, networking.
Так мы получаем огромное количество странных, сомнительных авторов, направленных в определенное удобное государству русло.
As a result, we have a large number of strange, dubious writers who work in certain channel manipulated by the government.
Так государство контролирует большую часть телевидения, большую часть СМИ. Эти авторы получают широкую огласку и поддержку государства.
And given the fact that the government controls most media and most TV channels, these writers are promoted most actively by the government.
В таком положении те, кто будут не согласны, будут вытесняться из этого поля.
While those who disagree with this policy are going to be pushed out of this area.
Как следствие, Запад и Америка будут обращать внимание на очень громких, наиболее известных русских авторов, то есть придерживающихся официальной политики.
And as a result, the West and the United States particularly are going to pay attention to the most famous names, the most known names promoted by the official policy.
Именно эти книги будут переводиться на английский и другие языки.
And their books are going to be translated into English and other languages.
Так происходит самое примитивное искажение.
This is the most simple way to distort the reality.
Let me turn the question to Ludmila. You are, well, no, but I want to ask you because you were trained, you're a novelist now, I've written many books, but you were trained as a biologist. I think you have a master's in biology, and in science, the sort of sine qua non of the advancement of science is empiricism, the quest for factual truth. In Russia, well, in the sciences, does respect still for the scientific for truth still hold more purchase than it does in the political and literary realm? And even beyond that, I mean, in my limited understanding of the history of Russian science, Pavlovian research on, was sort of yoked to the idea of justifying totalitarian impulses back in the Stalinist era. What is your idea about scientific truth, literary truth, and the Russian government's approach to controlling all of these?
Спасибо, замечательный вопрос. Просто прекрасный.
Thank you. That was a great question.
Дело в том, что между художественной истиной и истиной научной есть очень глубокая разница. Дело в том, что научные истины подтверждаются экспериментом или не подтверждаются. Тогда они уже не истины, если они не подтверждаются.
The problem is that there is a big difference between the truth in the science and the truth in the literature, because whatever you establish as a truth in the science, you can prove it with an experiment. And if it doesn't work, then it is not truth.
У нас несколько месяцев тому назад произошла большая неприятность. Закрыли фонд «Династия». Это фонд, который издавал огромное количество научно-популярных книг, переводных, причем в основном американских. Вот это то, чего безумно не хватает сегодняшнему обществу.
Quite recently, a very unpleasant event happened in Russia. The Dynasty Foundation was shut down. The Dynasty Foundation was publishing a lot of books on science, popular books on science. Mostly they were translated from other languages, and this is exactly what we miss a lot.
Вот поэтому я совершенно не убеждена в том, что есть художественная истина и как нечто окончательное и убедительное, потому что, скажем, я некоторых авторов очень любила в юности, а потом их перестала любить. И то, что мне казалось истинным в 16 лет, перестало мне казаться истинным в 32, а тем более в 64. Вот. А что же касается науки, то дважды два все-таки остается, продолжает оставаться 4. И поэтому моя раздвоенность, она на самом деле мне дает большое удовольствие. Я получаю удовольствие от этого. Потому что тогда, когда я не уверена в истинности художественной, то я всегда могу прибегнуть к научному дискурсу, и это очень приятно.
Regarding the artistic truth, it is more complicated. And for example, when I was what I believed was the artistic truth when I was 16 was different when I was 32, and let alone when I turned 62 or 64. However, in science, 2 + 2 always remains 4. And this provides me with a great joy. This bifurcation provides me with a great joy, because every time when I feel confused and feel uncertain about my artistic values, I go back to the scientific discourse.
One of you, I think it was one of you, actually, maybe it was Masha, said that the sort of trajectory of Russian politics and culture has been to constrain the ability for artists to inhabit a gray area, and that increasingly under Putin, as he becomes increasingly more sort of nationalistic and martial, it's black or white. Do you feel that that is true, and does it affect how you do your poetry or your fiction or your journalism? And I guess Maria and Anna, I'll ask you first.
I think that it very much depends on the framework you're existing in. And frameworks, it is also something you can change. And when it comes to our pursuit of understanding of what is happening in Russia, I think that the most important framework now is a moral framework. Mm-hmm. This simple, pure and simple system of coordinates that helps us to define ourselves, to understand where is black and white, and if they exist. No 50 shades of gray, just black and white, just good and evil. And it is, sometimes it is just necessary to remind yourself that good and evil exist. It is just pure and simple as that. But of course, as Lyudmila points, in the realm of artistic work, it is slightly or completely different, and it's different when it's coming from an artist to artist. But it is still important to remember that, well, that moral issues exist.
Yeah.
Well, I will agree. The thing is that we all have to abandon our beloved postmodern games and relativism, because we have now no opportunity for it. We have no choice. In my everyday work, I'm just dealing with history and historical memory, and I can see how the denial works, how it ruins everything. Well, there is a story. We have in Moscow, but I'm absolutely sure that it is just the same in all other Russian cities. We have absolutely no memorial plaques on our houses with the word arrested or repressed or something like that, because our cities just deny this period of our history. One of ex-journalists and citizen activists, Sergei Parkhomenko, arranged a project which is called The Last Address. It's more crowdsourcing. People write him. We know that in this house used to live my grandfather or father. He was repressed. Then Sergei comes with a little memorial plaque with those words. It's a great project. And there is a big house near Tretyakovskaya Gallery where a lot of Soviet writers used to live. And so they wanted to hang this memorial plaque there. And there was, but almost all people who live in this house now didn't want it, and there was a big scandal, and there was a big meeting where everything was discussed. And those people pronounced a wonderful phrase. They said, half of our country was repressed. What did this man exactly do, except he was repressed, arrested and repressed? What are his other attainments? What did he do except it, so that we should hang this memorial plaque? The thing is, it's about moral, actually. The thing is that we had another phrase which I hate from the bottom of my heart. When you're talking about repressions, you very often hear a phrase, nobody was repressed in my family. What for? For what? Sorry. The thing is that between this phrase and the phrase half our country was repressed is no difference, no boundary, and it's the most dangerous thing, I think. Sorry for my English.
I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience. But I have three final questions, I guess. And one, if I'd asked it 6 months ago, would have been a silly question, but now it's actually a burningly urgent question, which is, and the next two are both serious whenever I would have asked them. What do you all and Russians think of Donald Trump?
Well, I think it's a 100% true version of our Zhirinovsky. And the similarities are so striking that the Russian language site Medusa, that is based in Riga in Latvia, even made a test out of it. They were quoting Zhirinovsky and Trump, and sort of urging the viewers to compare and to say which quote belongs to Zhirinovsky and which one to Trump. And I tried to pass this test, and I failed.
Anyone else?
Ответ дан. Исчерпывает.
This is it. I mean, surely answered.
Well, let me ask my two final serious questions. I guess so the penultimate one is, what do you all, I guess, but more pertinently, I guess, what's your sense of what the average Russian under Putin today thinks of America and Americans?
I have a story. Two stories. Two short stories. First thing.
They hate us, they want to eat us.
First story. When the temperature between Russia and the States became, well, less hot in the last few months, a guy who is writing for Kolta wrote a column for us describing what is happening in the governmental media now and how do the changes look. And on one of the biggest radio channels, there was a show, a talk show. It was titled Why Did We Hate Americans? And I loved the word did. It means everything is, kind of reversible. Nothing is final. And the other story, I already told it in NY, but I hope no one in Washington was able to. It's a story about a hairdo. I was sitting at my hairdresser. She was, doing something with my hair and chatting a little bit, as we always do, but usually about shapes and colors and stuff. But on that day, she was, into talking politics. And she says, well, and did you notice that no one loves America now? No country wants to be friends with it. No one likes them. It is the beginning of decline of the U.S. And I'm sitting, keeping the poker face and thinking, what is my choice? To make my views explicit and to lose my hairdresser. We're in a relationship for 6 years. But I didn't need to decide because then, I can hear how the kissers are slowing down. And then a second of silence, and then she says, yesterday I was into a supermarket and I wanted to buy some cheese, some French cheese, and there is none. And, what do we do in that Ukraine? What did we need there? And, that's about reversibility. Mm-hmm. And I'm not really sure if it gives us hope, because it means you can, change one type of propaganda with the other and get the immediate results, and it will mean nothing. But at least it gives an answer to the question, why did we hate America? We didn't. Really, we didn't.
Anyone else?
Well, maybe I'm in a position of total denial here, and I admit it, because we have no instrument to measure it, because we know that official statistics and all works of sociologists and all opinion polls just doesn't work in a totalitarian society. And we have our own statistics, and we all used to talk to the cab drivers and hairdressers. But I don't trust my own statistic, and that's my position.
Do you trust your hairdresser?
Yeah.
Good. I promised one more question, but I'm going to smuggle two in, and then we'll open up to the audience. One is, you are all, among the four of you, you are novelists, poets, journalists. This is an eternal question going back hundreds of years, but what concrete role does poetry, fiction, literature, and journalism, which is a little bit of a separate category, what role do they have to play in the world, and more specifically in a totalitarian state where free expression is limited?
Сложно.
May I provide you a complicated answer?
Вы знаете, идея, что мир представляет собой текст, она сегодня стала общим местом.
It became a platitude, the idea that the world is a text.
Да. Во всяком случае, с 1953 года, когда Крик и Отсон предъявили миру структуру ДНК.
At least from 1953, when Crick and Watson provided to the world the structure of DNA.
И с этого момента тема текста и наполнение смысла этого слова, оно очень сильно изменилось.
And from that moment, the issue of text and the meaning of this word have mutated significantly.
И, по-видимому, единственное место, в котором происходит созидание текстов, это человеческое сознание.
And the only place where texts are being created is the human mind.
Добавить одну маленькую черточку, одну маленькую букву к тому огромному тексту творения, в котором мы пребываем, это очень много.
To add one little dot, one little letter to this humongous text of creation is already a lot.
Мы можем ошибаться. Нам кажется, что мы создали новый текст, а он не новый. Но восторг мы испытываем настоящий.
We can be mistaken, we can be misled. We might think that we have created something new, a new text, but actually it is not new anymore, but the joy is authentic.
Я просто, так сказать, счастлива, что мы причастны к этому процессу великому, и очень многие люди это знают. И даже не только те, которые в состоянии создать эту ниточку нового текста, а тот, кто в состоянии ее прочитать, понять, потому что это тоже участие в тексте. Я очень довольна жизнью.
And I'm very happy that I can take part in this process, that I'm engaged in this process, that I'm involved in the process of creation of this text by this, and not only those, and not only me, and not only those who add a new thread to this long text, but even those who can read it and understand it, they also can be very happy, and that makes me a very happy person.
Well, as you know, a poet, and a good one, said that poetry makes nothing happen. And, well, he was right. But it does some other thing. It forms, it shapes people who are able to make things happen. And that's what it is here for.
Ilya or Anna?
Мы уже ошибаемся.
When you ask the question, what is literature supposed to do, this is already a wrong question.
Есть некоторые вещи, которые просто происходят, и текст самый естественный из них.
There are things which happen by the nature, and text is one of those things.
Желание рассказать свою историю, чужую историю, придумать историю наиболее естественную.
A desire to tell your own story, or to tell somebody else's story, or to make up a story is quite a natural desire.
Если мы говорим о тоталитарном государстве, авторитарном государстве или каком-либо государстве, которое как-либо влияет на нас, мы говорим о попытке влиять на наши истории.
And if we are referring to a totalitarian state or authoritarian state or any kind of state which tries to make a difference, to influence us, it means that it tries to change, to make an impact on our stories.
Все разговоры этих дней – это разговоры о нюансах этого изменения.
And basically everything what we are talking lately about is, we are talking only about nuances of these mutations.
Но так или иначе, люди продолжат рассказывать истории, и этому нельзя помешать.
But no matter what, people are going to continue telling their stories, and nobody would be able to stop it.
Как вам известно, Солженицын описывает, как он придумывал страницу за страницей своей книги и прокручивал ее в своей голове, чтобы не забыть и когда-либо записать.
As you probably know, Solzhenitsyn was writing every single page in his head, and then was running it through his mind and keeping in his memory in order to have an opportunity one day to write it down.
И, возможно, именно это позволило ему выжить.
And probably this what helped him to survive. This was what helped him to survive. I'm sorry.
Well, final question before opening to the audience, and this will sound craven, but it's sincere. Here we are under the auspices of the Atlantic Council and underwritten by PEN America. But what can we here in this room, and what can organizations like PEN and other organizations do to support the cause of what you are all laboring every day to promote? Free expression, literary creativity, dissent, resistance. What practically can Americans, and again, for the 100 of us here in the room, what can we do to be helpful to you all?
Я думаю, что мы сейчас переживаем такой кусок времени, когда помочь нам ничем нельзя, что мы сами должны решать свои проблемы, потому что это чрезвычайно важно, чтобы общество само себя, так сказать, программировало.
I believe that we are going through a specific stage of our history where nobody can help us, and we need to sort out our issues ourselves. And I believe it is the society needs to be able to start to address its own issues.
Но нам остается одна важная опция. Мы можем друг друга понимать, мы можем обмениваться культурой, и в конце концов мы можем друг друга любить, и ничего лучшего нельзя придумать.
But we still have one very important option. We can still try to understand each other. We can conduct cultural exchanges, and we can love each other. And I believe that this is the most beautiful thing which exists in the world.
Okay. I think that there are some absolutely necessary things that just have to be done. Building those cultural bridges that Lyudmila mentioned is absolutely important. Is of absolute importance. Everything, panels, roundtables, programs for the young writers, so they would be able to come here and to see things from the different angle, from the different point of view. But there is one thing that I consider maybe to be the most important. It is to continue seeing things and making things visible. Because the most dangerous thing for everyone, wherever they are, in Russia, in Ukraine, at the Middle East and the Far East, wherever, is when you're falling away from the front view. I was speaking with my colleagues from Ukraine a few months ago, and they are also suffering from the state of partial visibility. They have this feeling that the world was viewing them for a while, and then something happened and the focus changed.
Yeah.
Yes, and they are standing in the darkness, wondering what has happened. And it is totally important just to being viewed, to being, it's totally important to stay viewed, to stay in focus. And I hope it is a real thing, and people are able to do that.
Anna or Ilya, do you have any thoughts about what, again, we in this room or we in the United States could do to help the cause of freedom of expression in Russia?
Well, I can just agree with my colleagues. I believe in force of open world, of communication, and I think that any help will come from can come from this side, and that's all I think.
Делом первой необходимости понимание, что не существует никакой монолитной России.
I believe that the most important thing is the understanding that there is no such thing as monolithic Russia.
Это огромная страна, в которой живет очень большое количество людей с разными мыслями, с разными желаниями, которые производят разную литературу и имеют разные представления о будущем.
This is a huge country with lots of people. All of them have different ideas, different wishes, different thoughts, and
Я забыл. Из того, сколько мы общались за эти дни с американцами, я понял, что большинство воспринимает Россию и россиян неким синонимом Путина и его воли.
And I was impressed during the several days while I've been to the United States and talking to Americans. I was impressed how much people here perceive Russia and Russians as a synonym for the word Putin.
И мне кажется, культурная работа первой необходимости в разделении этих понятий.
And I believe that the priority should be to divide these two concepts.
И для этого нет инструмента лучше, чем культура.
And there is no better tool in order to achieve this goal than culture.
I keep promising to open up things to questions. I will, I promise, but this begs one more question for me.
5 more questions, вам 5.
What is it about the four of you on the stage? Are you typical of your fellow Russians, or is there something one would maybe expect that the typical response would be to knuckle under and to toe the party line under Putin? None of you are doing that in your different journalistically, novelistically, poetically, journalistically. Are you typical, or are you differentiated in some way, and what sets you apart or what doesn't set you apart? And then I promise we'll open to questions.
Типичным представителем.
Please tell me, are you a typical American?
Am I what?
Are you a typical American?
Probably not.
Нет, наверное, нет.
Ну вот в той же мере и мы.
As
Это
much as you are
неправильный
not-
вопрос. Это неправильный вопрос.
We are not typical Russians as well. As much as you are not a typical American, this is a wrong question.
Okay.
Конечно, мы принадлежим к тем 14% народа населения, которые не в восторге от Путина. Но дело в том, что эти 14%, они все думают по-разному. Потому что это 86% думают одинаково, а 14% они же думают.
Of course, we do belong to this segment of 14% of Russians who are not keen about Putin, but they are not excited about Putin in very different ways, each of them. While those 76 who love Putin, they all think the same way. 86, I'm sorry.
Хотя я думаю, что и они тоже не думают одинаково.
Да все.
Although, I'm not sure it tells Ilya that they all think the same way.
Let's now open up to questions. We've got 25 minutes, so right there in the tan suit.
Thank you for your answer to that last question. It's not a question worthy of Washington. My question is, I wanted to talk about how attention gets focused on difficult national conditions. Some people say that the Nobel Peace Prize was given to Obama 7 or 8 years ago before he had done anything. The Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to America from Social Democratic Europe for electing Obama and not swinging to the right under Mitt Romney or the oligarchic classes. This past fall, the Nobel Committee awarded a Belarusian author with some Ukrainian ancestry the Nobel Prize for Literature. Do you feel the literary enterprise in Petersburg, Moscow, the other major cities of Russia, had a blowback, had any impact from the establishment for social democratic Europe recognizing a Russian writer from outside of Russia? I don't think that the Nobel Committee will be able to give a prize in literature to a Russian writer every year going forward under the Putin tyranny, but do you see ways that Europe and America and Japan could work, and maybe India and other Japan could work more strongly together to recognize free speech and free expression in Russia? Thank you.
Thank you.
Можно ответить просто про Нобелевскую премию?
Do you mind if I answer just the part about the Nobel Prize?
По тем или иным причинам я считаю Светлану Алексеевичу одним из двух кандидатов для если бы Нобелевскую премию вручал лично я. И это было до вручения.
For a number of reasons, if I would be the one who would call shots in awarding Nobel Prize, Svetlana Alexeyevich would be one of my two choices. That would be before she was awarded.
Так как Алексеевич получил, мне осталось только расстроиться за второго кандидата, это Салман Рушди.
Now that she got her prize, I'm upset that the other guy didn't get it. Who is Salman Rushdie?
Anyone else?
Well, maybe just one point that for me, and I was delighted to know that Svetlana Alexeyevich received the Nobel Prize. It means not only the flattering and wonderful fact that someone writing in Russian and writing things so important was met with the prize that, as you know, do not necessarily finds, the right candidates sometimes. But for me, what is maybe the most meaningful is that the prize went to someone writing non-fiction prose. And it is the new beginning for the whole idea of writing prose. And so that's why it is so wonderful.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Заметка. Дело в том, что в этом году опубликовали список 50-летней давности нобелевских лауреатов, тех, кому не дали в тот год, когда дали Нобелевскую премию Шолохову. Этот список фантастический, потому что там не было ни одной фамилии, которая по-писательски не была бы на голову выше, чем Шолохов.
This year, somebody published a list of 50 other writers who were not awarded with the Nobel Prize in the year when Russian Soviet writer Sholokhov got this prize. And it was an amazing list because each of them, everyone and each of them, were way better than Sholokhov was.
И я открыла завещание Нобеля, и я его прочитала.
And I opened the Nobel's will, and I read it.
Человек, который взорвал полмира динамитом, в конце жизни, организовал эту премию, в которой он дает огромные по тем временам деньги ученым, которые служат прогрессу человечества, и литераторам, которые работают на гуманизм. Гуманизм и литература не вполне совпадающие вещи.
The man who blew up half of the world with his dynamite, at the end of his life, gave his money to two categories of people: to the scientists who promote progress, and to the writers who promote humanism. Unfortunately, literature and humanism are not the same.
У нас есть некоторое искаженное представление о том, за что дается Нобелевская премия. И надо это для себя уточнить, тогда не будет этих вопросов всех.
We have a pretty distorted idea about what the Nobel Prize is awarded for. Once we clear it up, we're not going to have any questions.
I'm Harlan Ullman with the Atlantic Council. As keen observers, being writers and journalists, I would like to ask a question, a political question in that context. For almost 15 years, I have sat on a very senior advisory board for the Department of Defense. Earlier this week, we had the most pessimistic assessment of U.S.-Russian and Western-Russian relations I have heard in more than a dozen years. 4 of the 5 sitting chairmen of members of the Joint Chiefs, when testifying earlier last year, were asked what is the most dangerous threat, and 4 of the 5 said the existential threat was Russia. It seems to me that relations are getting worse. The question is, in your view, how much worse do you think that relations between the West and Russia, the United States and Russia, are likely to grow, and can anything be done to reverse that?
Well, I'll try to answer. Well, I'm not a politician, so my answer will be simple. Russia is not Putin. And I think that it is a mistake that is, well, sometimes done. Russia is much more complicated and much more. She has a great potential for unexpected things to happen. And so when we are equaling Russia with Putin, or even those 86% with Putin, we are making a mistake. As Lyudmila puts it in our conversations, a black swan is always to be expected. So, that's it.
Here. Lots of questions.
Ilya Zaslavsky, I'll be a devil's advocate and ask a question on freedom of expression. There are now getters of freedom of expression, one could say, in Russia. One radio station, one TV station, a couple of websites like Kolta. There is quite a widespread view that it's those channels that allowed, the steam to come out a little bit, that prevented Russia from its own Maidan in 2012. So you can talk as much as you want on radio and in literature, but as long as you're not ready to fight on the streets and to counter Putin's regime on the streets, then your situation will always be different from Ukraine. So what do you think about, also the same was said about Facebook, that people are allowed to say stuff on Facebook, less so now, but still, they can express their fatigue with the regime. But that freedom of expression can actually prevent Maidan in Russia, prevent actual protest. What do you think about this?
Well, the first thing is that there is always one thing of anything in Russia. Not only one TV channel or one website or whatever, one intense city as a place of force, Moscow, and it was like that for all the Soviet period, and before it was St. Petersburg, but always, the one place of importance. There is now we're having, only one valid political candidate from the opposition, meaning Alexei Navalny. So that's how it works. But I'm absolutely sure that, Facebook didn't prevent the Ukrainians to start Maidan. So freedom of expression is not the biggest thing that prevents us to do things. I don't have an answer. But when I am thinking about what happened in Ukraine, I feel that they have, one benefit we don't. They're having an example, and a huge example, of a lifestyle, of a state they don't want to be like, and meaning us. We don't have such an example. We don't have a mirror. We don't even realize maybe what is happening, what happened to us, especially for the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, I think that there are, say, 3 methods to deal with a regime. First is to destroy it. Second is so-called theory of small deeds. And the third is migration, and we try them all in different ways, and we both know that none of them is perfect.
So we've got about 10 minutes left, so keep your questions to, I know this is a very complex subject, but 15 seconds or less, so how about right here in front?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question actually for you as writers. the government approach to censorship in media and literature has changed. There is less, or there may be more, but who is your audience, and what general changes or whatever mutation that has happened to the general reading public in the past 25 years, sorry.
Or 25 centuries, if you want to be broad, yeah.
That's not for 15 seconds.
Yeah.
Во-первых, мы разные писатели.
First of all, we are different writers.
Да, и разная аудитория.
And we have different
К сожалению,
readers.
скажем, Кольта, замечательный совершенно сайт, он имеет гораздо меньше читателей, чем я, довольно уже известный автор в нашей стране.
And unfortunately, Kolta, which is a wonderful site, has less readers than me, who is quite known already in Russia.
Илья автор молодой, и сегодня трудно говорить о том, какова его аудитория.
Ilya is a young writer, and it's very hard to define who is his reader.
Я в этом деле 25 лет.
Well, I'm in this business for 25 years.
Значит, читательская аудитория во всем мире падает. И вы это знаете, потому что мировой процесс, он единый. У нас некоторые вещи опаздывают на 5, 10, 20 или 100 лет, но, тем не менее, все-таки процесс один идет в мире.
Throughout the whole world, there is the same process. The readership goes down. The number of readers goes down, and what happens to us, we're just part of this world, although we might be late, 10, 15, or 100 years, but we still follow the same pattern.
Вот, поэтому я думаю, что у нас разная биография писательская, но я думаю, что этот ответ, который общий будет и для нас, и для вас. Чтение как культурный формат уходит, возникают новые какие-то форматы. Мы живем на очень узком перешейке культурном.
And though we are very different writers, I'm going to provide you with an answer which is going to be valid for both you and us, that the reading as a genre, the reading of fiction is disappearing, and there are new formats of the cultural activities, and right now we are on a very narrow isthmus.
Да, и я думаю, что скорее мы будем смотреть на те процессы, которые проходят у вас, и впоследствии их повторять, потому что все-таки пока что в области вот этой массовой культуры все-таки, впереди планеты всей, пока что вы.
And I believe that we are going to follow your example, see what you do, and repeat it in our soil, because no matter what they say, you're still number one in the world.
Let's do 5 more questions, assuming we can limit each of them to 15 seconds or less. So, right here.
Добрый вечер, Ариэль Коэн, Атлантический совет. Good evening, Ariel Cohen, the Atlantic Council. English. The peak of the Russian literature was in the 19th century. It was Chekhov, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, etc. Those writers formed not just the public opinion of the Russian Empire, they continued to influence the public opinion of all these poor Soviet school children who had to study them in high school. But a certain product appeared in the society. Today, we don't have that. So my question is, how and who is forming the societal, ethical norms? If it's not the writers, it's not even Solzhenitsyn, it's not Brodsky, it's not Mandelstam. Who is it that is forming? Is it Давай поженимся? Is it TV? Is it Dmitry Kiselyov? And what are you guys going to do about it? Thank you.
Well, speaking of 19th and 20th century, I think that what happened to Russian literature in terms of circulation, in terms of being known is a tragedy, not only for Russia, but also for the Western world. The fact that the works of Osip Mandelstam or Alexander Vedensky or Andrei Platonov, who is an absolute genius, the fact that their work was not published in their time, and it was not translated in time, and maybe not even translated till now, or under-translated at least, because, well, there are beautiful translated by Alexander Vedensky, made by Eugene Ostashevsky. They are just perfect, believe me. But anyway, the fact their work was not absorbed by the Western culture is a tragedy, not only for Russian culture, but also for Western culture. That is something I wanted to point. And the other thing is, I'll tell. The other thing is, anyway, the circulation of the first books of Anna Akhmatova was 300 of copies. And the circulations of the best books of Osip Mandelstam was, so to say, 3,000. So writing works, writing things that are to define the face of the country is a long-term process. It is not about, the TV shows of current times. It is something just to be done. And when you're trying to describe it, how it is done, it is not about circulation. It is not about the direct the influence, of course, the direct influence on huge masses of audience. I really think that it doesn't work like that, and it didn't work like that also in Britain in times of T.S. Eliot. Think about the circulation of the Criterion. It's just a different thing. But I can name some authors that are, crucial for understanding current situation. And I'll be speaking about the younger generation, about guys who are, 5 years, 10 years younger than me, and who are of absolute importance for understanding what is going on. And I would say 3 names. Kirill Medvedev, who is absolutely brilliant, and he is translated into English, and I guess you can buy his poems in your local bookshop. And there is Lenor Goralik, a poet and a writer and author of short prose that is absolutely thrilling and also very important for understanding how the modern consciousness, how the modern sensibility works in Russia. And there is also Alexei Tsvetkov, a young writer of short prose, who just a year ago he received the NOS Literature Prize. No, the old one is wonderful, but Alexei, the second one is someone totally new, not related to Alexei in any aspect. He writes prose, and you should try it.
So mindful that we're running out of time. We want to all get you all home through the snow-impaired city. Let's do 2 more questions, 15 seconds or less for the question, and then keep the answers to a minute or less. So how about right here? And then we'll go do something from the back.
Okay, so this follows very clearly on what you just said. I lived in Moscow for a few years, and I remember that it was almost a trope that very few people who went to journalism school would actually go on to become journalists, because it's so difficult, because there are many compromises that one often has to make. I don't know about the situation in literature, but I suspect there's something similar. So I was wondering, how do you feel about this next generation of writers, journalists, editors? And do you feel that there are people who are willing to continue to reflect on Russia's history, to reflect on the present?
Reflect on the president.
Okay,
Аня уже начала.
I do believe in common sense and communication and talent and so on. Unfortunately, I do not believe in our universities and especially of Department of Journalistics and in Literature Institute, and we have to do something about them. But I really do believe in grassroots, and I hope everything will be great with talented people.
Идет речь. Письмо — это вещь, которая происходит наедине с самим собой. Проблемы существуют огромные с какими-то процессами распространения, издания, чтения, дискуссии, вплетения себя в литературный процесс, ну, в то, что происходит у тебя с самим собой, еще как бы никто не вмешивался.
I'm not sure that I understand what kind of issue of the writers you're talking about, because a writer is a dialogue with yourself. You do it in silence, and the issues of publishing, the number of copies, the debates, the criticism, it's a completely different and separate process which has no real impact on the creativity process.
Last question. How about there in the back, right there?
Oh, thank you. Hi, my name is Karina Arlo. I work for Echo of Moscow. And my question is about handshakeability, if I may say so. So it's been a huge scandal in Russia. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, former political prisoner and political oppositioner and Putin critic, so he took a picture with two really nasty people. She is a singer, and the second person is her husband. He's a musical producer. So they're really nasty people. They publicly justified the war in Ukraine and Crimea annexation, and he called gay people perverts. And she said that it's biologically unexcused to be a homosexual. So my question is for every one of you. Would you would you take a picture with such people? Would you shake hands with such people? Should it be in question at all? Thank you.
Ну, вы знаете, дело в том, что, наверное, я здесь один из людей, которые пожала руку самому Ходорковскому.
Well, probably I'm one of the few people here who shook the hand of Khodorkovsky himself.
И должна вам сказать, что пожал я ему руку по той причине, что он очень мужественно себя вел.
And the reason why I did it is because
10 лет тюрьмы, которые он выдержал, очень достойно.
He showed a great deal of courage, and 10 years which he spent in jail, he behaved himself in a very dignified manner.
И я ему позволяю делать то, что он считает нужным, жать руку, кому он хочет. Не вижу, это его право. И поэтому у меня нет никакого морального осуждения относительно Ходорковскому, который пожал не тому руку.
Therefore, I believe that he has a right to do whatever he wants to. He can shake hands of anybody he wants to because he deserves this right, and I'm not going to condemn him for shaking a wrong hand.
Well, I'm sure there are more questions, but we're out of time, so I want to thank the Atlantic Council for hosting this. Thank you to PEN America for underwriting this tour of these brilliant and important writers. Thank you to all of you for turning out, and thanks to our panel for participating in all this. So.